Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name's Andrew Barber, and I'm a senior contributing editor here at eSchool News. And I'm delighted that you could join us on the spring day. But before we go any further, I want to recognize Team Dynamics for sponsoring today's event. Team Dynamics provides tools for K-12 districts to manage processes throughout the organization and also bridges the divides that sometimes occur between classrooms, administrators, facilities, and more. This all happens with a single cloud-based platform that combines service management and project planning. And I will hand things over to our speaker in just a minute, but first I'm going to inflict a couple of housekeeping items on you. First of all, we are recording the event, and in a couple of days we'll send out an email to everyone that contains a link to the recorded event. And you'll also be able to download a PDF of the slides from that same email. And second, please ask questions. Don't feel as if you have to wait until the end of the presentation. At any point, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A box on your console and hit the submit button. And I'm sure we're going to have some time at the end when our speaker can address your questions. And we also have a chat function, which if you look down at the bottom of the screen, it's the blue group chat icon down there. Use chat to talk among yourselves or to contact me or the eSchool News team if you have any technical problems or any other issues during the presentation. But I do have one favor to ask of you. Please don't use the chat function to ask our speaker questions. He's simply not going to have time to monitor the chat. So if you have a question for him, please use the Q&A panel instead. And with that out of the way, let me now introduce you to today's speaker, Andrew Graf. Andrew is Chief Product Strategist for Team Dynamics, and he's a co-founder of the company. And so not surprisingly, he is well-versed in the issues facing education and understands how technology can help overcome some of these challenges. Welcome, Andrew. It's a real pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that, and I also really like people who it's very easy to remember their name. I think we're up to a good start. Great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone, and I want to talk about some things that we're seeing across the education space and talk about some of the trends from some market study that we've done over the past several years. And we're really going to look at how increases in spending and the demands on educational IT and service organizations are changing how these organizations need to operate. And so when we look at spending, ed tech is expected to reach $252 billion by 2020. It's astounding. And we have almost 56 million students in public schools. And what's fascinating about all this is that it's changing the way, obviously, education is provided. And we're seeing a couple things. The demands and pressures are more than ever. Some of these drivers are things like blending learning environments, one-to-one classrooms, maker spaces, virtual and mixed reality, all these technologies that are potentially improving outcomes but also fundamentally changing the demands on an IT staff. All these great technologies cannot be implemented unless we have the resources and knowledge to actually implement them and manage them. So some of the major challenges that we've identified out in the market are around resource constraints. So it's not surprising with all of these changes in the education space that the IT organizations haven't had time to evolve and be properly staffed, et cetera. And most of the clients we work with are needing to do more with the same amount of resources they have or sometimes less. And so when we studied this, 45% of the respondents listed resource constraints as their number one issue, and then 29% were cybersecurity. And that makes total sense as well, for all the reasons that you read about and see in the news. We're really going to focus on the resource constraint side because we do see a path to freeing resources to spend more time on these new critical technologies and serving your student and parent and teacher and administrator client bases. So we've identified a handful of areas where IT teams can actually really better use their resources and, again, free those resources. And we've identified top 5, and this is through our experience and survey work that we've done in the space. And so we're going to walk through these one at a time just to shed more light on what they mean. But the first was self-service portals. Second, knowledge-centered service. Third, using ITIL, which is the IT infrastructure library framework. Talking about proper change management and project management. So we'll get into all of these in a little more detail here shortly. And the first place we'll start is with self-service. But what we're going to do prior to that is we want to get an idea of how you rate your maturity. So I'm going to turn this back over to Andrew for a poll.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Andrew. Yes, if everyone would just take some time to choose one of these options, essentially to give Andrew some idea of where you are as an audience in this whole process of IT maturity and what your school or district are doing. So, we've got everything ranging from no process or system all the way down to being optimized continuously. And if none of these options apply to you, please choose the last one, which not relevant to my district, or we don't do this at all. And I'll just give you a couple of seconds to do that, and then we will see where the audience stands. I think that's probably given everyone enough time. So, Andrew, I'm going to advance us to the results, and we can take a look, see how things are going.
Great. Excellent. So this aligns really well with what we're seeing in the market space, where we have a real mix. And a lot of schools, in this case, we see 34.1% of respondents have some processes in place, but we're finding still a lot of opportunity to improve IT maturity without a whole lot of rocket science or heavy lifting changes. So this was really good. And I think that I'm not surprised to see there's only 2.4% at the highest level. I think that is rare. So if you are in the lower tiers of IT maturity, you're in plenty of good company there. And if you're at that highest level, bravo, that's exceptionally good because it's unique. So as we talk about building IT maturity with these 5 areas, the first thing that we see to really drive efficiency is self-service for common questions and needs for students and parents and teachers, administrators. When a district provides knowledge that's easily accessible to their communities, it really drives down the cost of service. So HDI, the Help Desk Institute, did a study, and they estimated that the cost of a support call that requires a human being is $22. Whereas if a student or parent can self-serve and answer a question, the cost is only $2. It's significant. And you might question the upper bound or the lower bound of that range, but even if it's somewhere in the middle from a cost standpoint, it's still costly. And what you're finding out there is that clients, your parents and students, they don't rate an experience highly from a satisfaction standpoint if they have to interact with a person. They want answers. We're in the Google and Amazon, Zappos generation where service is changing. So what we're also finding with good self-service is that our clients typically receive about 70% fewer inbound requests. So think about what your resources could do if they were fielding 70% fewer inbound requests. What we typically find the time goes to is faster attention to critical issues, right? Where a teacher's struggling with classroom tech or you have a parent, we can get to those more quickly. It raises the overall quality experience. In addition to that, we now have resources to do other things that we weren't otherwise able to get to advance our maturity. So it's pretty powerful what this can do. And amazingly, on average, K-12 districts give themselves a 2.9 out of 5 when it comes to maturity. So there's a lot of room for improvement here. The next thing we see to help, and it's part and parcel to your self-service, is to how we generate knowledge. How do we continually build a knowledge base and refine a knowledge base so that we can provide self-service answers? And knowledge-centered service, or KCS, has been the best framework that we've seen to accomplish this. And if you're not familiar with KCS, just Google knowledge-centered service and you'll see a lot of content about it. But the principles are pretty simple. What it states is, when we resolve issues or incidents and problems, we should generate knowledge, answers. What was going on when this incident was encountered, right? What was the environment? What was the impact? How did we resolve it? And when we do that, we're seeing that the districts that implement this can generate a lot of knowledge quickly. It also specifies a review process. So knowledge is reviewed initially, and there's usually a group who will do that, and then it's published out to the knowledge base, or maybe a website if you don't have a knowledge management tool. And it's reviewed regularly. And so one of our schools had a goal over 7 months, I think, to create 200 knowledge articles out of their service management process. And during that 7 months, they generated almost 2,000. It's amazing what can happen, and they dramatically drove down the number of requests. And what's nice with a tool, if you have one that specializes in this, the clients can tell you where the knowledge is bad. And you have analytics to tell you how people are navigating it, so you can continually improve it. And some of the stats on this are pretty remarkable. So a 30 to 50% increase in first call resolution and a 50% decrease in incoming load. We've seen a little bit higher than that, as I stated earlier, but we can't say enough good things about KCS. And it's a good standard. It's a good cross-industry skill set for your people, too. So if you're looking for professional development, KCS is a great opportunity, and it's pretty low cost as well. The ITIL standards are basically a process to guide how we address incidents and service requests, problems, and changes. And those are all defined terms, and there are others within the ITIL framework. But what it does is it just sets a series of best practices, a standard guide, and it helps us be more efficient and effective. And what this leads to is better customer satisfaction at the end of the day. So think about an incident means that a client is having trouble getting a service that we promised them. You know, my laptop's broken, my email's not working, I can't get on the network. And what that means is somebody is not able to do their job, get an education, provide an education, administer a school because of it. So we need to restore service to them. A service request is something, for example, I need a new software application deployed onto my machine. It's a service request. These things are separate and handled differently with different response targets. And then problems are bigger items that are potentially causing or will cause incidents. So imagine managing these things differently. So a network outage might warrant a problem be created, but there's lots of incidents. So the good platforms allow you to group all those incidents together and manage them as one thing. It saves you time, so you don't have to do one of two things. Either go back hand to hand to each of the students, parents, staff, teachers, administrative staff that experience this and email them, or just not get back to them at all. Right? Neither are an ideal situation for IT. So ITIL provides a really nice framework. It is another great professional development and career opportunity for staff and team. ITIL Foundation, ITIL certification is not terribly expensive, and it's a great credential, and it will help you. That's the good thing. Everyone wins. Change management is something we called out separately because of the potential upside of implementing a change management process. So 80% of unplanned downtime is caused by IT itself inadvertently. I'll give you a perfect example that we see regularly in our client base when we end up engaging them. We need to update the software or update a piece of network hardware. And when you're in the room, it's just a bunch of blinking lights and little boxes with cords coming out. We don't know what the impact is of making changes. So a proper change management process lets us describe and define the change. There's a review process where we go through and determine, hey, if we make this change, is anything else dependent on this particular piece of technology? What are we going to do if this goes wrong? How do we unwind it? And when can we do this without being disruptive? Or if it needs to be disruptive, what's the ideal time? It's just a series of, think of it as a checklist that you go through for each change, and people sign off on it so everyone knows it's going to happen, and we have a plan if it goes bad. That can dramatically decrease these inadvertent outages. And think about the impact on an inadvertent outage. I'm sure everyone's experienced it. If you've worked in IT, we certainly have, and I certainly have throughout my career many, many times. Think about the impact when something like that goes wrong, how the burden flows through to your service desk. It's tremendous. And how irritated people are. Right? You never like people to come visit you in your office when they're looking to strangle you. Right? That's never good. So this is a fabulous process to implement. It doesn't have to be rocket science. When you think of ITIL or see a framework or standard, you know, if outside of my industry, when I see an acronym for something, I think, oh gosh, this is going to be complicated. Is it worth the effort? What I will say about this is the L in ITIL is really critical. It's a library. You don't read the entire library in every section. I'm sure somebody has, but most people don't. We pick and choose what is going to be beneficial for us, highly valuable. So let's talk a little bit about project management and how this can increase your maturity and impact the availability of your resources. So a recent study of government and public sector suggests that 52% of large projects were over budget, behind schedule, or didn't deliver to scope, and 41% needed to be abandoned and restarted. That's staggering. But yet it's not surprising once you dig in under the covers. Think about all the firefighting you do day in, day out. Everyone experiences it, even the best organizations. So if we can have better service processes and better change, we're doing less firefighting. That's one way to improve the likelihood of success for projects. The second thing is making sure that you're using the right tools for that particular project and that particular team. The other thing that comes to mind when I say project management, just think, when I say project management, what do you think? Just think about it for a second. Most people have images of a complex Microsoft project file with lots of dependencies and moving parts and dates you have to set, or we see a huge PowerPoint slide deck that needs to be updated every week to help the executives understand what's going on. Project management done well is right fit for the project and the team. So I'm going to explain that a little bit. The large projects you do, let's say you roll out a new e-learning platform across the entire district. That's a big project, expensive. Typically employing consultants or trained project managers. Those require complex tools like what you envision when you say project management. You know, issue logs, risk registers, earned value, KPI tracking, baselines, critical paths, you know, multiple project status meetings per week. They require that in many cases to be successful. But what we find is that most of the projects in education are small, managed by a handful of people. We may not have a trained project manager. And all we need to do as a team is understand what we need to get done, when it needs to be done. We need to be able to communicate about it. So when what we've seen when PM project management efforts fail is that one of two things happens, or I guess three. Number one, the organization tries to force the complex process down on every team, even if their needs don't warrant it. What happens? People roll their eyes. They go back to what they're doing. They become frustrated with the organization. The other side of it is that we implement a process that underwhelms the experts and the big project managers. What happens then? They start using the tools that they used to use. Right? Now we don't have all that information in one place. So the alternative is providing a platform or approach that caters to both, yet provides yet provides visibility to leadership to make decisions. And that's what, being in education, that's from a product standpoint what we need to do. And just think about the two extremes. We talked about the ERP, but think about your project teams. Well, what is effective for you? Right? The district probably wants to know a project's going on, so would it be beneficial to be able to say, we have a project, this is when it's supposed to start and end, here's a general health indicator, and we're just going to use a virtual Post-it note board to say, this is what we need to do, here's what we're going to do this month, here's what we're going to do next month, and we can just talk about it as a team, collaborate around it. The right tool for the team and the project is critical to success. And the other thing to think about is we're not just talking about IT projects. For us, we see projects all over the place. Facilities projects, construction, big preventative maintenance projects, HR performance review cycles, setting up high school graduations, all these different things require some level of tool and rigor. So something to think about. I want to share with you a case study here talking about IT maturity. This is Denver Public Schools. And they set out a 5-year roadmap around the technologies that they wanted to enable to drive their academic excellence and realized, wait a minute, we need a way to globally view and manage all of the technology and what we're doing to support it and the community. So this is a major change. And so they realized that they needed an IT service management platform so that the strategy could be executed upon. And now they're able to prioritize service requests and project and manage those queues of work and appropriately allocate resources. So it was a huge win. When we think about service management and project management, I mentioned it a few slides ago, this is not just an IT challenge. Here's a sampling of how this all can come together. The obvious is IT, lots of need for it, but less obvious sometimes are some of the other areas. I mentioned event planning, HR, facilities, etc. There's a lot of need in these areas, and what becomes more important than ever is something I mentioned earlier too, that the tools are right fit for the needs of the organization. I don't know if you've ever tried to suggest that one of these other departments use an IT help desk tool that says incident or help desk tickets. What we have found is that HR or event management or facilities look at it and say, that's not what we call things, and I don't want to see all of your stuff. So a partitioned tool that allows you to collaborate at the same time has been pretty powerful. And with our tool, just to give you some bearing, most customers are up and running in 60 to 90 days, and then it's easy to expand from there. And that's not a full-time effort. That's on site talking about how we're going to support the different business process that you do. But it's a rough timeline, and I think that's consistent for other tools like it as well. So when we visualize this one platform, think about an environment where all of the data is in one place. So your project portfolio management data is in one place, all of your service management is in one place. So you can start making sense of this. And what we find a lot of times in education too is that IT not only wants good information to make decisions, but they want good information to push back on unreasonable expectations or to prove the value that's being delivered. We have found over and over again that IT is doing so much work and providing so much value that no one outside of IT can understand. They don't realize it. When we talk to administrators outside of IT, we'll ask questions. Say, is IT a good value? And a lot of times say, absolutely, IT is a fabulous partner. About equally, we'll hear, I don't know. I review that budget. Boy, it seems like a lot of money they get. And I'm not suggesting this is going on at your institution, by the way, your district, but we see it all the time. And we'll ask, okay, well, tell us what IT does with their funding. And most people can articulate 40 to 50%. Imagine that. Imagine going to buy a car, and you purchase the car, and then there's only half of a car there when you get there. You're going to be disappointed at not understanding the value equation there. So IT are usually brilliant people, hard workers, effective IT people, but they're typically terrible marketers. Why? Because they studied technology, not marketing. Much as if I would never call somebody who is a marketing specialist to build a data warehouse for me and help me visualize retention trends across the district. They're different skill sets. So Team Dynamics has been able to help IT organizations summarize what they've done, not just little bits and pieces, but the whole thing, and then be able to present that back in a scorecard format. It's incredibly valuable. And whether you consider a tool like Team Dynamics or not, the concept of a periodic scorecard that's produced for leadership and presented and repeated, it's incredible what can happen. You don't need a tool to do it, but a tool like this helps a lot because it makes it easier, but you don't need a tool to do it. So if you haven't thought of it, I bet everyone on the call is ahead of me and says, yes, we've been doing that for years, Andrew. Move on. But if you haven't, it's a great idea. Here's an example of a self-service portal. Responsive, works on every device. Accessible, one thing that's critical is that it has to meet accessibility standards. Education institutions are getting attacked when they don't provide accessible technology. There's this new cottage industry of lawyers who go create class action lawsuits, and they have their accessibility testing tools, and they go out and they mount lawsuits. And then the attorneys make a lot of money, and then everyone else affected gets 15 cents. And then they have to go deposit that 15-cent check, and it's a waste of time. So what we're seeing is that that's critically important. All devices. When's the last time you saw a student walking around with their laptop open? Probably not. When's the last time you saw a parent dropping a student off and they had their laptop in their hand? Probably not very often. But imagine a place where they can get information about the schedule for the district. It's searchable on Google, right? No longer can we rely that somebody's always going to come to our website. The platform should allow that content to be made available out on the web. These are some important things. As a software company, these are the things we have to think about. But if you're building this stuff internally, these are also things to think about. And by the way, the WCAG 2.0 AA compliance, which is the standard for accessibility in the U.S. as of January 18th of this year, that's another great career opportunity to understand. So we've talked about KCS, knowledge-centered support, ITIL certification, and then also understanding the WCAG standards, all really incredibly important in a sort of public area. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. Okay. Now, a couple things quickly. Team Dynamics is focused on the education industry. We were recently recognized by EduVentures as one of the 5 ed tech companies to watch at the end of last year, and I think we were sort of identified because we just have a clear, concise solution that's focused on the education industry. And most educational software companies are focusing on the classroom tech, right? The virtual reality, the augmented reality stuff, which I think is just the coolest stuff ever. If you go to FETC or the other conferences, make sure you try it. If you haven't, it's very cool. But we're one of the only tools that focuses on, okay, how can we help IT and the rest of the organization, how can we free the resources to actually start doing some of this stuff? Right? How do we enable all this stuff going on in the evolution of education? So it's a different perspective, I think, that they liked. And just another example of how an education institution has been able to deploy this type of technology. Texas Women's, TWU, they were looking for just a service management tool. And then they realized that, wow, this is something that can be used across the organization. And so they were able to spin up all these service applications all over campus, and they have 6 departments up in less than a year. And all of their data is now in one place. Leadership there can say, let's look holistically about how we provide service. Where is our greatest demand for service? Do staffing levels align with that demand? I talked earlier about having great tools to push back an unreasonable expectation. There's nothing better when somebody's complaining to IT about the lack of service, and we can say, hey, listen, if we want better service here, look at my staffing levels versus the amount of work that we have to do in this area. My suggestion is that we fund another position or consultants. Having data helps tremendously. So, and I think they've been able to realize those benefits. The other thing I'll say too, when you're thinking about a solution provider, it's not just the features and functionality. That's obviously very important, we were really proud to be identified by Infotech as in the two highest categories for both project portfolio management and IT service management. And what I really like about this one, Infotech doesn't operate like a lot of the other large analysts, and the founders of it came from the other large analysts. What they decided to do was really deeply understand the technology. I'm on the analyst team, and when we do briefings for most analysts, it's an hour twice a year, 25 minutes talking about their research agenda, and then the rest of the time, a little question about the products, and then they go off and tell people about the products. Infotech it's a double-edged sword. I think they're the best. I think they're incredibly thorough, but we did 18 hours of review on the ITSM platform. They're incredibly thorough. And the other thing that they do that I really like is they blindly go out to customers in a sampled customer base, and they ask not only about the technology, but they ask about the company. How good is this company at serving you and advancing your objectives, not just technology? And Team Dynamics' emotional footprint is what they call it, was 90 and 100% likely to recommend, and that was off the charts. So the quality of the data or the vendor and their understanding of the industry obviously resonates. So something to consider as you're going out there, not suggesting that, hey, everyone has to come on to Team Dynamics, but when you're thinking of solutions, look at the industry experience, ask some of those questions, refer to some of these types of reports. Can't recommend Infotech enough. They have great information, and they'll tell you every side of each tool. Here are their strengths, here are their weaknesses, so you can make an educated decision. All I can say is that they're incredibly thorough, right? And again, like I said, that's for us, it's great, but it's also very time-consuming. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. Hope everyone has a few takeaways, whether it's things to go implement or career development ideas around knowledge center support, ITIL, other processes. But I think we have some time here for some questions.
Okay, well, Andrew, thank you so much. A really fascinating presentation. I knew, just judging by your first name, that you would know what you were talking about, and that was absolutely great.
Very high quality. High quality.
Yes, very high quality. I do have, so if we have plenty of time for questions, and if people in the audience have additional questions that you want to get them in now so that Andrew can tackle them. But I'm going to go, Andrew, I'm going to take us back to one of your slides where you described the one platform, one approach. And you made a reference to the self-service portal. Is it, when someone in the audience wants to know, can you have content in the portal that is separate for teachers and students? Can you sort of segregate that out?
Absolutely. So and this is important for, again, whether you're developing something in-house, you're using a tool like Team Dynamics, figuring out who needs access to what. And so partitioning that off has been incredibly important. Obviously, there are things that teachers should have access to from a knowledge standpoint, HR, for example, that parents obviously won't. So it's critically important, and that's a good thing to review with any platform. Is how easy is it to partition that data?
Okay. All right, great. And we'll come back to some of these other questions. You mentioned during your presentation that sort of a typical implementation might take 60 to 90 days. Given that you work some at the school level, small schools, some, you showed us, Denver, which is an absolutely enormous school district. Can you give us, can you get a little more detailed about that implementation time frame, gauging based on size?
It's not so much size of the organization as it is what types of processes do we want to support. So as an example, if a district says, listen, where we think we can get the biggest bang for the buck is freeing up our technicians to faster respond to high priority items. Right? That's a great problem statement. Where we might focus is let's focus on self-service and incident and service requests. Let's start there. And that type of implementation might be half as long as if we said, well, we want to do that, but we're also suffering a lot in the change management and we want to manage the project. That might be twice as long. So it's hard to say specifically how long it will take, A lot of it has to do with also the clarity of the objectives. So what I coach districts to do, regardless of product or approach to these problems, is start with some agreed upon pains. So an example would be if we're on an implementation and someone says, okay, one of our biggest pains is that we're not getting back, we're not responding to teachers and parents fast enough. And they're getting very frustrated, and now the administration is all over us to fix the problem. That's a problem worth solving that almost anyone who touches service can understand. So when we start with something like that, we'll say, all right, what is the minimum that we can do from a product and process and organizational change standpoint to address that goal? So when an organization starts with a handful and 5 max of pains that everyone agrees upon, if you walked around, let's say it's IT, we walked around IT and we showed this list of 5 things. We said, do you feel as though if we solve these, would you be more satisfied at work, and do you think the district would be better off for it? Everyone should be able to shake their head and say, yes. If we solve those, that would be a great day. So that limits the scope of what we're doing, and we can constantly look at any sort of suggested configuration and all those, oh, that's really neat, that would be so nice to have moments. We could put them in context and say, okay, we know that's nice to have. Does it align with solving one of these 5 major problems that we can all agree are killing us? And if the answer is no, we're going to put it in the parking lot. That's phase 2. That way, when we get to training, we can start with the goals. These were the pains that we said we were going to fix for you. One of the pains could be, we are constantly fighting fires. We need more time to focus on doing the work in the time and with the quality that we expect of ourselves. That is a pain I have seen. So what we want to say is, help us. We need you to work in this product to help streamline that process. It makes everything easier. Now, once we're implemented and we feel like we've made a dent in these problems, it is so much easier to go back and roll out other nice-to-have stuff. And the good news about that approach is you automatically have a phase 2. It's crafted for you. And you can start over and re-rank in a new set of problems. You can do it all over again. But you've already come up with all of the ideas through the original implementation for your phase 2 to make it even better. So it's just that approach, I cannot stress how important that approach is to the success of these things. And it's not terribly it's really not complicated. And I think that's a fundamental thing to think about with an implementation of anything like this.
Okay. All right. Well, terrific. Well, thank you very much. I also want to come back. I'm going to put us back to another slide, which was the knowledge base and this idea of knowledge-centered service. Can you talk a little bit about how the knowledge base typically gets populated? How does that get built up?
So a couple ways. Districts always have existing knowledge. It's out there in the form of PDFs. It's on your website. So, you go to any district website, you can find a ton of knowledge there. So the question is, do we keep the knowledge where it is? Do we put it all in a knowledge base, or is it a hybrid? And so we can take that existing knowledge, pretty easily convert it into knowledge articles. KCS has a framework for what a knowledge article should look like. It's not a difficult thing to convert. And we can still leave stuff up on the web too. But the idea is that knowledge base can be initially populated with the existing knowledge that we have. Then I'll go back to a top 5. What are the top 5 questions or 10 that we answer over and over and over again? Let's make sure that we have knowledge out there on how to answer that ourselves. And let's make it available to make sure it's searchable on Google. Let's track the keywords that people use when they talk about these things. Start with the biggest pains first. Then, to continue to build it, what KCS specifies is that when I close or work on an incident or a problem, that I document it. I document what the scenario was when the client experienced that particular issue when the problem happened. I document the impact, and I document what we did to fix it or how we worked around it. And I mean, that's a high-level paraphrasing summary of the things to record. Then we have a basic review process. So a team of people typically sits around, and it's usually not anyone's full-time job, where we review knowledge articles and update them, and then we push them out to the knowledge base. And so once we start doing that, if the commitment is, hey, I'm going to rewind a little bit. Knowledge is created for every incident or problem if there isn't already existing knowledge to address the question. So we create knowledge on a continual basis. We refine it. And what we do is to transition people to thinking this way, when we could have answered a question or the client could have found their own answer, we put a URL and saying, hey, you know what, this information was out here. Here's the knowledge base link. Or if you had Googled these terms, you could have found it there too. We're always happy to help you. But just so you know, you don't have to wait on us if you don't want to. That's a great way to transition people. And it's extra work up front, but slowly but surely, people will start coming around saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to go to Google first, or I'm going to go to the portal first. Okay. Did that answer your question? Right. Do you think the way that is intended?
Yes, it did. I hope it answered the audience member's question. It sounded perfect to me. I'll give you that. So we'll move on to one other question that's come in, and I'm going to earlier again in your presentation, you talked about how someone in human resources, for instance, or in facilities. Mm-hmm. Doesn't want to necessarily start speaking in the vernacular of IT or starting mm-hmm. to learn different systems and so on. So, could you talk a little bit about how you might customize what they see and how they interact with the platform? I mean, let's take facilities, for example, and let's say they've got a problem and they need to, put a ticket in. Maybe they don't want to call mm-hmm. it a ticket, but they need to put a ticket in. Mm-hmm. How does someone in facilities route that ticket, create that ticket, and get it through mm-hmm. while feeling it's within their environment?
Yeah, it's a common example. So in our world anyway, what happens is, let's say that request got entered. I'll give you a real example. The network jack in my office is broken, right? So we hit it with a vacuum cleaner, or I slipped at lunch and kicked it in. Yeah. That gets submitted to IT, and IT says, okay, you know what, part of this job is ours. We're going to go out and install a new plate. The other part is for IT to test it. So what will happen is either IT could be part of a sub-task on that, or it could spawn another request in the IT service application. And there's probably a dozen ways to skin that. That's how it works in the team dynamics world.
Okay. All right, great. All right, thank you. Well, Andrew, you have obviously done such an amazingly comprehensive job that we don't actually have any further questions that have come in from the audience. So we will be able to release you and the audience to slightly early today. Is there anything, Andrew, further that you wanted to talk about, or any other questions that have come in that you want to return to? Otherwise, we'll probably wrap up at this point.
I think I can close with a couple statements. As an organization, we found the best districts think about how they can better evolve and serve their customer base. And hopefully this presentation has given some ideas. And think about the problems that would be resolved by some of these processes, and how a tool can help as well. A tool is only part of the solution, right? The thinking about why is it important, what is it important to solve is key. And obviously, you can reach out to Team Dynamics at any time. We can walk you through what we're seeing and maybe shed some light on it. But this should be fun. This should be a hopeful exercise of saying, wow, if we implement some of these processes, a couple things are going to happen. Our students and parents and teachers are going to be happier with us. My staff is going to be more credentialed, and our team members are going to have more knowledge of something important, KCS, ITIL, right? This should be a fun exercise to approach, and it should be exciting, because on the other end of it, we know we're going to have more time to do the kind of work and the quality work that we want to do to support the augmented reality and maker spaces, all that really cool stuff, and get out of the slog of answering the same questions over and over again. So I think it should be a really, really hopeful and fun, optimistic initiative, no matter what path or solution you end up with.
Okay. All right. Well, terrific. Well, thank you. On that note, why don't we wrap up? Andrew, thank you again
Thank you.
a really excellent presentation. And I also want to thank Team Dynamics for its support today. And one final reminder, and a bunch of the audience members have been asking this, we will be sending out an email to everyone who attended today when the recording of the webinar is ready. So thank you, and this concludes today's webinar. Goodbye.